Well, I forgot to mention as well, actually, if you're going to have a Bond film, you've got to have a scene in a casino. Even if Bond doesn't gamble, you have to have some sort of casino action. It's not really a category, but I thought it needed mentioning. And also the casino employee has to say something à la banque. So like, wheat à la banque, for example. Don't know what it means. I'm not a gambling man myself, but that's important to have. Next category, I've got best product placement. Again, this is a tricky one. I don't know. I mean, I suppose whatever sells best or is thought of the best, really. Amiga watches, maybe. Vodka martini. I'd imagine, sales of olives in the 1970s were pretty artificially high on the back of people making vodka martinis. Shaken all over the place but not spilt, to coin Rick Mail, sort of. What's the worst product placement? Do you know what? I think it's definitely Heineken, because Bond never drinks beer. We know that. And if he did, he would drink, a microbrewed IPA or something, not a bog standard, generic, bland and tasteless Dutch lager. What was interesting watching all the Bonds is product placement really is nothing new to Bond. And they took it sort of so early on. Bond would always be drinking a vintage Bollinger or something that was unattainable for middle class people. But then you can see there's a certain point at which Bond then starts sort of slumming it and drinking things like Absolute Vodka or Stolichnaya, stuff that middle class people could actually buy and aspire to. So in the Living Daylights, we've actually got a Carlsberg sign. Bond doesn't drink it, obviously, but there's a Carlsberg thing in a bar, so there's a bit of a nod. But Bond would be, let's be honest, Bond would be down the Colonel Brewery near London Bridge. He wouldn't be in Yates's. So, as a beer swilling hick myself, I can't imagine Bond ordering a Stella in a tux in Monaco or, even a Desperado. Honourable mention here, I guess, for worst product placement is actually not a product placement per se, but it's 007 Aftershave, which they've started selling now. I find that absolutely baffling, and I just don't understand. Next category, best character name. So many good ones to choose from, so I've just made a bit of a list. We've got Jaws, that's pretty good, which, I named a pet after. We've got Max Zorin, Friday, Oddjob, Scaramanga, Knick Knack, Holly Goodhead, Monsieur Aubergine, Lord Percy, Mr. James St. John Smythe, and that's just a few. There's a lot of good Bond names in there. What was the best theme song? I've got a very soft spot for The View to a Kill, which was done by Duran Duran, but you could probably say that's just a good pop song and not really a classic Bond theme. If you're going to hold that view, we've got GoldenEye by Shirley Bassey, which was really good. Probably the most iconic was Live and Let Die. It was really catchy and also a good song. And of course, then you've got Goldfinger. But whenever I remember Goldfinger, I always think of Homer Simpson singing that Max Power song. Best Bond girl. Well, I suppose Ursula Andress from the first one, Dr. No, is probably considered the most iconic. And, she's really beautiful and stuff, but she's fairly vapid. So I suppose in terms of best Bond girl, it really depends what you're after in a Bond girl, because they vary so much from film to film. And not necessarily for the better. So we get, from sweet and stupid to a high-kicking Chinese special agent. I do tend to prefer the later ones, as they tend to have, a bit more going on, and, the sexual politics has changed, as I said. And they have a bit of a personality, and they flesh out the character a little bit more. So, for example, Anya Amasova or something. She was the KGB agent in the Roger Moore days, and she was probably one of the most noticeably not too bad ones, but to be fair, at the end she did need saving by Bond in a crab-like sort of sea base. I'd also like to give an honourable mention to Thank Me Janssen, who played Xena Onatop in GoldenEye, and teenage Chris appreciated her very much. And I actually remembered her character name before I'd even seen Bond, so it obviously made an impression on me back in 1995. Reminds me of, thoughts of Gillian Anderson, all that kind of thing. Also, I suppose Terry Hatcher, but she's not actually very good. She's the sort of tragic victim, but she's not a very good actress. And, Xena on the top, she's more sort of squeezing men to death with her powerful thighs. So I suppose she should lose points there technically. But yeah, probably Thank Me Janssen as is my favourite Bond girl. Also, actually, I should do an honourable mention to Grace Jones's Mayday. She plays exactly the same character she did in that Conan film she was in, and she's really, really scary. I don't know how I feel about that, but it's scary, so at least she's getting some emotion there, because most of them, are pretty vapid. So also I thought I'd do an honourable mention to Miss Moneypenny. She's lovely. She's boring, but she's lovely. And, the lady that Bond slowly but surely turned into clearly a mad spinster. The backstory I've invented myself, to keep myself entertained. She's probably, she was courting a nice gentleman called Percy, who's probably, he was probably a member of the Queen's Tennis Club, but she probably ditched him because she wanted Bond, but then she found herself alone. So, actually, to be fair, that Moneypenny in Skyfall was fantastic. Naomi Harris is a really good character. She's a great actress. She's beautiful, and catch her in 28 Days Later. And it was just, she was well written for and interesting, and a real change from the bland sort of nonsense of Moneypenny in the past. Who was the worst Bond girl? Well, there were clearly, a fair few actresses here who were picked for their looks and not necessarily their acting chops. Watching them all again, I thought Octopussy was pretty duff. But for sheer irritation, I think the one that really stuck in my craw was the vapid blonde Stacey from A View to a Kill. Because, she just sort of shrieked, "James!" every 5 minutes. And Bond must have been looking forward to dump her really quickly. I mean, all that Queen and Country stuff, and then I imagine he did a runner. So, there were quite a lot of one-dimensional damsels in distress there, weren't there, in terms of the Bond. But I thought that Stacey's character in A View to a Kill, I think they probably actually wanted more from the actress. They wanted, they actually gave her a respectable backstory, but she just kept, shrieking. I mean, the first scene we see her in, she's actually pointing a shotgun at Bond, but then at the very first opportunity, literally seconds later, she is, cowering into Bond's manly chest kind of thing, and help, save me, James. So she was really irritating, and she reminded me of a weather girl, and actually weather girls these days are a lot better than they were. I suppose it's a bit like, when someone teaches a parrot to say who's a pretty boy, and because, she was supposed to be a scientist, right? She was supposed to be a scientist, but she had absolutely no authority, no credibility whatsoever. And it was a lot like when she was actually talking about the science stuff, right? She was supposed to be a professional. It was like, when people train a parrot to say who's a pretty boy, but the parrot, clearly, the parrot doesn't actually know what the words mean. And I suspect very much that was, that actress playing Stacey had no idea what she was talking about. She clearly had no clue. But then, I suppose Denise Richards was supposed to be a scientist, and, she wasn't great at acting, was she, to be fair? Who's the best Bond? Well, for me, the best Bond is Daniel Craig. I think that for many, probably still it's Sean Connery, but I think Craig's the best. He's got the most about him. I think Roger Moore was very important. Without him and the levity he gave Bond, I think it would have been sunk long ago. So, it depends what you're really looking for. I'd like to see Daniel Craig. I know time isn't on his side. I'd like to see him do one or maybe two more Bonds, whether Sam Mendes is there or not, to really cement him in most people's minds as the best Bond. I just want to mention quickly as well, Pierce Brosnan, I think he did a really good job. He's not the greatest actor in the world, but I think he did a good job with, a difficult plot, script, silly gadgets, silly set pieces. And in a similar vein, actually, Timothy Dalton, he did a perfectly fine job, and he was pretty intense, so I liked him.